Hi, everybody. My name is Neil Seidman, and I'm co-chair of the Public Education Committee for ADAA. That's the Anxiety and Depression Association of America. And welcome to our webinar. And the title is Managing the Roller Coaster of Emotions During COVID-19. And we're really happy to have our presenter, Dr. Bethany Teachman. These webinars are presented by the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, which is the leading nonprofit organization in the field of anxiety and depression. Our mission is to improve diagnosis and to promote the prevention, treatment, and cure of anxiety, depression, and stress-related disorders through education like this webinar, through practice and research. So please take advantage of all the incredible resources on our website. That's adaa.org. And also on the website, you'll find a really wonderful list of treatment providers. Just click on Find a Therapist from the homepage. And we also have a free peer-to-peer support group, which you can also find from the homepage. And finally, after watching the webinar, if you have questions, feel free to send your questions to webinars@adaa.org. And lastly, you can make a charitable donation, small charitable donation on the website to support ADAA and these programs that we're offering. So let's get started. Dr. Bethany Teachman is a professor, and she's the director of clinical training at the University of Virginia in the Department of Psychology. A leading researcher, she's the author of over 185 publications, and her research is focused on anxiety and mood disorders. Dr. Teachman is chair of the Coalition for the Advancement and Application of Psychological Science, and she received a 2019 presidential citation from the American Psychological Association. So welcome, Dr. Teachman. Thank you for joining us. And let me turn the screen over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
And now I'm turning things over to you so you could show us your
Absolutely.
PowerPoint. And it looks like it's coming through great.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much to Neil and to ADAA for this opportunity to talk a little bit about how we manage this wild roller coaster of emotions that people are experiencing right now.
Yeah, so what are some of the emotional challenges that we're facing now?
Yeah, I think people are having a wide range of reactions. So I think one thing that's important to say at the outset is that I don't think there's one right way to respond at this time. People are having very different experiences. So for some individuals, they were spending a lot of time at home and maybe working from home initially, and so things may not be that different. For others, they may be dealing with job losses, serious health scares, or people in their family becoming sick and major economic changes. So people are really having a wide range of different experiences right now. Surveys at this time are certainly telling us that people are feeling stressed and having a wide variety of mental health challenges, and it's not surprising. So we see a lot of anxiety and stress, a lot of people experiencing sadness, as well as irritability and anger. There's a lot of tension right now. Many people describe difficulty sleeping, and for a lot of people, it's a lonely time. And some people also have shame reactions about kind of what their experiences are like right now. And in addition to managing all of those things about their own mental health, people are often worried about helping others, right? So people with children, young children or teenagers are worried about what can they do to support them. And similarly, people are worried about their partners and their mental health. So it's a challenging time for really a lot of people right now.
And just such a wide range of challenges. And one thing that I'm hearing as you're starting is just all these different, really challenging emotional issues that we are dealing with. Uh, what makes this pandemic that we're going through so unusual emotionally?
Yeah, I mean, any crisis is, of course, a challenging time and stressful, but there are a few things that I think make this particularly challenging. One is just the sheer scope of the issues that we're dealing with. It's also novel. We don't have a lot of experience, most of us, in kind of how to respond to a situation like this. A lot of parts feel uncertain and unpredictable, and so that raises a sense of confusion, sense of worries about what's going to happen, and parts of it feel uncontrollable, as though it's happening to us. And all of those are sort of really the ingredients that lead to heightened levels of anxiety and heightened levels of stress and mental health difficulties. So unfortunately, this has a lot of those ingredients that make it kind of that perfect storm for making it challenging to manage our emotional health during this time. Not to mention that many of us no longer have access to some of the supports that we usually have because of the fact of social distancing.
I
So
like
what
the
I'd
way
like
you
to do,
have this.
oh, please.
Sorry. I like the way you have this broken down into these different emotional issues that we're facing, so we don't have to try to, deal with everything all in one bite.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to use this as kind of a roadmap for our discussion so we can talk about
Okay.
each of these different pieces in turn, if that works.
Yeah, wonderful. So, anxiety. Yeah, that would be the first
Mhm.
that would come to my mind. So, what are some ways I can manage my anxiety?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing to say is that it is quite normal to be feeling some anxiety at this time. As I said, it really is a time that has all of those ingredients there. And so some of it is realizing that it's okay to have some anxiety. There are, however, a lot of things you can do to try to make sure that anxiety doesn't really persist and escalate. So, one is actually limiting our media exposure to COVID-19 stories. So, while we do want to stay informed to get the information that we need in order to take appropriate precautions, prior research tells us that it's not a great idea to sort of be constantly refreshing your browser and seeing constant social media or news media stories about COVID-19, because it puts us in this zone of sort of constant threat vigilance. So instead,
And
what we
and if
want
I
to do.
do that, if I keep checking on my computer for more news, I'm going to keep finding more stories, right?
Exactly, exactly. So instead, what we recommend is that you choose a couple of reliable sources, CDC, whatever is your newspaper of choice, that is again a reliable source, and check in maybe a couple times a day that are specific times where you're going to focus, get the information you need, and then close those browsers. Don't be constantly checking, constantly getting news stories, because we know that that can increase sort of your vulnerability to really staying in that anxious mode.
Do you have any advice about like how much as an adult, how much time I should be spending on average reading news stories about the pandemic?
Yeah, so now I'm giving you more of my personal opinion than a specific research recommendation. But we do have an interesting piece in treatments, for example, for generalized anxiety disorders. People choose specific worry times where they're going to kind of focus and spend that time. So I would be thinking about, 20, 30 minutes, 20 minutes where you kind of get the news updates that you need, get the information that you need a couple times of the day, and do it in those two blocks. And then at the other times, you don't need to constantly be checking.
That sounds like really good guidance. So, 40 minutes, I could really see the stories that are relevant and that are interesting. And um, I personally like choosing the articles that I read as compared to sitting just being a passive recipient of what a cable news
Right.
show has to give me.
Right. And that also allows you to kind of be choosing the articles that are coming from sources that you trust and think are likely to be giving you more reliable, valuable information. So it
And
makes sense to be active.
when I'm looking at a news website, sometimes I have to hunt for them, but very often I can find some very optimistic stories.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that
Uh,
it is definitely the case that for every sort of horrible story, there are also these stories of amazing kindness, amazing contributions that people are making. So, and, progress in thinking about finding treatments, establishing a vaccine, all of those pieces. It's actually incredible the progress that's happened in a relatively short space of time.
Well, I'm already imagining my stress coming down instead of checking every 10 minutes. Just those, like you said, maybe 2 times a day for about 20 minutes, something around that.
Yeah, absolutely. In addition, you want to have a mindset that's about problem solving rather than panicking, right? So part of what that means is do the recommended precautions for, wearing a mask, social distancing, washing your hands, all of those things. But don't do tons more than the recommended precautions, because that's when you start to go into kind of that panic mode. So if you find yourself going to the store and you're thinking, I have to buy a supply of chicken and toilet paper to last me for 8 months, that's not a great idea. It's not a great idea because it means other people aren't going to get the supplies that they need, but it also means that you're kind of operating in this panic mode, and that's teaching yourself that you're in this constant state of threat, and that's actually going to increase your anxiety. So instead, what you want to do is, again, think about what you need to do to solve problems, but really try to challenge that catastrophic thinking. So yes, there are real threats in our environment. It'd be ridiculous to pretend otherwise. But you don't want to sort of assume the worst all of the time, right? You want to ask yourself, are there different ways to think about the situation? And that can
And the
help you to
CDC
kind of manage.
the CDC website has the practical problem solving guidelines.
Exactly.
I don't have to figure these out on my own.
Right. There are
And if I'm
instructions
a
for
bit
us
older,
about
it
what
might be
we
a little
need
bit
to do.
different. Sorry. Yeah, I was just saying that the guidelines that apply to me might be different depending on my age. Like they have certain recommendations for 65 and older, but the practical guidelines are there. We don't have to try to figure those out on our own.
Right, and that's a really important point you're raising because it also shows that, again, we're not helpless in this. So, yes, while elements of this feel uncontrollable, there are things we can do to kind of control the situation. And so for me, it really helps to think of this as a collective challenge, right? So this is a really difficult, very big challenge, but by working collectively, by doing things to make sure that we reduce not only our own risk, but others' risk, there's a lot that we can do to manage this situation. And that's very different than conceptualizing it as an insurmountable threat that says there's no way you can manage it, there's no way you have the resources to manage it. So this is really hard, but we're not helpless in this. We can work collectively to manage it more effectively.
Okay. Sadness. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's say I'm feeling sad or maybe just low, low mood. What, I can't go out and do the things I'm used to doing. And so I'm just kind of feeling low. What are some things that might be helpful?
Yeah, so, some of the things that help with anxiety are also going to help with sadness. So I'll focus on sort of additional pieces that I haven't talked about yet. One of the first really big ones is this idea that social distancing should not equal social isolation, right? So we know that our relationships matter tremendously to our emotional and our physical health. And so it's really important that while we need to do social distancing, that we are not becoming isolated, that we continue to have virtual connections or other ways that we are safely connecting with the people who provide us with social support. That piece of it is absolutely central to helping to manage that sadness. Some of the other things we can do tie to basic self-care. So doing healthy eating, regular sleep, getting regular exercises, going for walks, all of those kinds of things are really, really important. And then avoiding those unhealthy strategies, right? So avoiding an increase in alcohol use or drug use, all of those things that can kind of make us spiral down and set us up for trouble down the road. So all of those basic self-care things actually can make a really big difference in kind of how we manage this. The other piece that I point out is kind of the value of routines, right? And it's a bit of a challenging one at this time because for some people, they are feeling like they've lost all their routines because maybe they no longer have the job that they used to have, and they're actually feeling bored and not sure what to do with themselves. While other people are at a different extreme where suddenly they're trying to do a full-time job and manage 2 or 3 young children in the home and they're run off their feet. So people are having vastly different experiences, but all of us still need some routine, some structure, and a sense of balance of different activities in our life, right? So we need activities that help us to feel productive, whether that's tied to a full-time paid job or tied to other goals that you have. We want to have things that give us a sense of accomplishment. But we also need things that are fun. We need a break from all this. We need times that are relaxing. And then we also need times that are active, where we're getting exercise, where we're doing things that energize us. So it's about finding that balance that's going to be right for each person.
I've noticed for myself that, especially early in the day, if I do some physical exercise, it seems to lift my mood. Have you found that? Other people find that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the research is definitely consistent with that idea.
Okay. So these are really great ideas. Social connection, taking care of ourselves, having a healthy routine, including productivity and fun and physical activity and relaxation, having, I mean, it's going to be different for each person, but having some kind of a schedule that's giving us that structure.
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay. Irritability. So this is a very different emotion, but also very challenging. So like, I feel like sometimes I want to just yell or explode or, vent my frustration. And I think a lot of people might be feeling that way. What are some tips on managing feeling irritable and angry?
You are definitely not alone. I think for a lot of people, this is a very challenging time in terms of rises in irritability and anger. It's not surprising, right? When we're under stress for an extended period of time, it's natural that that's going to be a reaction. So I like to think about it as kind of 2 branches of how we respond. So one is thinking about what can we do to kind of reduce how often we get overwhelmed by anger in the first place. And then secondarily, since it's still going to happen sometime, what are things we can do to manage the situation when we become angry? So
Okay.
so in that first category of kind of thinking about, well, how do we reduce that sort of likelihood that we'll get overwhelmed by anger? Some of it is that self-care stuff that we've already been talking about. Because what that does is it makes it less likely that you're going to get totally depleted in terms of your resources that help you to manage stress, right? So we want to kind of keep our resource level, our sense of like, okay, we have a way to handle this at a healthy level. So the self-care helps a lot. Another big one is taking breaks. So we've talked about taking breaks in terms of like taking breaks from reading about stories tied to COVID-19, and that's a key part of reducing that tension that leads to anger as well. But also, we need breaks from the people that we're living with if we're with them 24/7. That's a lot of together time, right? So everybody's in a different living situation. Some people are in a 1-bedroom apartment, some people are in a large house, all kinds of different situations. People have different extent that they can use outside to go for walks and all those things. So you need to figure out what's going to work in your particular living situation. But even if it's about going to another room sometimes, even if it's about putting on headphones if you can't go to another room, or just saying to the other person, I need a little space right now. Finding those ways to get breaks is actually really healthy and reasonable to do and helps us not to feel like things are just constantly building in terms of our tension with people we're with sort of for a lot of that time.
And
Another,
it might not take a long break to be helpful.
right, and that's going to be different for each person. So just really paying attention to your own cues and your own needs in that space and asking the other person what they need can kind of help to manage that. But most of us don't do well with 24/7 of anything, right? We need kind of those breaks to kind of refuel, refresh, and be able to sort of have a different perspective.
Now, one thought that's coming to mind as I'm listening to you is many of us may be used to taking breaks in our life prior to the pandemic, whether it's during a work day and we take a little walk or, take a little coffee
Right.
break. So I always want to suggest to our audience that the same idea, different context, but really, really healthy to have some breaks throughout the day where you get some time to yourself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then some of it is also, showing compassion both to yourself and others. We are not going to be at our best all the time right now. There's just no way. The stresses are too great for people right now. And so recognizing that we're going to snap at each other sometimes, that people are going to say things in ways they didn't mean to say them, all of those things are going to happen. And the more we can kind of have that compassion for one another, the easier this is to manage and the less likely that things will escalate, right? Which is what we want to avoid. And so I like to also have this idea of kind of almost like putting money in the bank. So building goodwill. So plan positive interactions with the people that you're with. A time where you're not problem solving or dealing with the stressors, but are actually just fun things together. Because when you do those positive interactions, it's like money in the bank that sort of builds that goodwill with one another so that then when the inevitable stressors and frustrations and irritability arise, it doesn't tip us to such extreme reactions, right? We have some resources, some goodwill to kind of draw on. That said,
so it's not wasting time to be playful and do things that are fun. That's actually really important.
No, I would describe it as your homework for your mental health. In fact, it is not wasting time.
Everybody goof off and have fun.
It's essential, right? We cannot be living COVID-19 all the time. There has to be times where we take breaks. Otherwise, we are staying in that constant threat mode, and that's really challenging and depleting to do in any kind of sort of chronic, sustained way. So yes, there are hard parts. We have to deal with them, but we also need to step back and have as much in our life that feels normal and enjoyable as we can at this time. That's going to help us hugely in the long term.
Okay. So now then the next part of this slide. So I'm doing, these things the best I can, but sometimes I'm just enraged and I'm just so angry, and
right.
What can help me at that moment?
Right. So, we can do all these preventative things, but the reality is sometimes we're still going to get angry. And so in those situations, there's a few things that you can do to try to lessen the impact of that anger. So one is that when you become angry about something, instead of sort of going into that attack mode and sort of dealing with it right in that moment, if you can, plan ahead for a time when you're going to manage it, when you and the other person may both be in a kind of better space to have a more productive conversation. So I might say, to my partner, I'm having a hard time with kind of how messy the house is these days. Can we plan that Sunday after dinner, when things are a little bit calmer, we sit down and have a conversation about how we want to manage that? So I'm not avoiding the issue, but I'm giving the person notice about the issue, giving them a chance to think about it, and trying to set us up for success. I'm choosing a calmer time to talk about it rather than when I just feel like I'm going to explode because there's dirty dishes in the sink for the 800th time or whatever it is that's going on, right?
So that's a very different conversation than saying right at that moment, in the heat of the moment, why are you making this place so bad?
How dare you clean
that up? Right.
Right. So again, we want to set ourselves up for success. Part of how we do that is by recognizing early signs of anger as they start to rise so that we can use that as a cue to step back. So for me, if I'm starting to get angry, I notice that I'll have my heart starting to race a little bit more and I start to get that tension, right? It's that kind of rigid kind of feeling that I have in my body. Those are cues for me that probably I want to step back a little bit. Because what I want to do is step back, kind of catch my breath so that I'll be able to respond to the situation in the way that I want to, as opposed to just in a kind of impulsive reactive mode. So when I step back, I want to ask myself, what are my goals here? So sometimes when I'm getting angry, my goal is about changing another person's behavior. Sometimes when I'm getting angry, really my goals are about reconnecting with the person and just feeling supported. Sometimes when I'm getting angry, my goals are just really about, I just need to take care of myself a little bit. Nobody's done something horrible, awful here. I'm just at my wit's end. It's too much, right? And each of those is going to lead down a different path. They're all valid, right? But they lead down different paths. So if I can step back, catch myself before the explosion happens and say, what is it I actually need here? What is it I want to have go differently? that positions me to kind of be able to make that happen instead of kind of escalating in a way that I might regret a little bit later.
I really like that suggestion, because instead of just being caught up in the emotion of the moment, I am kind of bringing in my mental perspective a little bit. Say, well, yeah, I know I'm frustrated, but what's really my goal here? What do I want to have happen? I want my partner to do something different, or I want the house to be cleaner, or okay.
Right.
And that now I'm already feeling a little bit calmer, because now I'm addressing something practical.
And it's also, then it's about what it's actually about, as opposed to it kind of escalating into something much, much larger. And it gives you that breathing room to kind of, when you come back to it, be able to listen in a different way and really kind of try to hear the other person's perspective. So none of us likes to feel attacked, right? None of us likes to feel that we're not being listened to. So we want a chance to kind of have both people involved, be able to express kind of what the experience is like from their perspective. And, there's a lot we can do to try to kind of get into the other person's shoes. So asking those simple questions about how might they view the situation differently? What might be happening in their day that's leading them to react this way? So maybe I'm reacting this way because I had a really stressful conversation with my boss at work. Have I thought about what might have happened for my partner or the person that I'm having the argument with? Can I slow down enough to kind of hear what's going on their side? And when I do that, then I avoid the blaming language. And instead, I'm kind of thinking about, okay, what is it that I actually need and want? And can I directly express that, assert what my needs are, ask concretely for what I want, instead of it turning into kind of that blame game? It's much more likely to be productive.
Okay. One more question on this before we go on to other. Okay. Let's suppose that I did blow up. Any tips? Let's see, I did yell at
Yeah. So first of all of this is trial and error, right? So sometimes it's going to go well, sometimes it's not going to go well. We always want the plan B. If we have blown up, a big part of it is just taking responsibility for it, acknowledging it, and saying, you know what? I'm sorry. I wish I hadn't expressed it in that way. We still need to have a conversation about how we're going to deal with the cleanliness of the house, but I'm really sorry that I blew up on you. That wasn't helpful. What can we do to kind of feel better together right now? So again, we just need to kind of own it, apologize, and then move on, because it's kind of inevitable that we're going to snap right now, that we're going to have those experiences right now. And so we don't want to sort of let that brew and have the resentment and all of those kinds of things.
So we're not going to do any of this stuff perfectly.
Probably not, I'm afraid. Well, some of you might, but I'm not going to do it perfectly. And that's okay. I've come to terms with that.
Yeah. So even if I do lose it and, lose my temper, I can still respond to that in a healthy way.
And say, I love you. I'm sorry I said it that way. I wish I hadn't said it that way. Can we have a refresh here?
Okay. Good. Oh, sleep. Okay. This is a great topic. All right. So I think having challenges with sleep. I see you have some good tips here.
Yeah, happy to talk about a few of the strategies with sleep. And, I will say that this is a really critical one, because everything else we've talked about previously, the anxiety, the sadness, the anger, all of those things are, of course, harder to manage and more likely to occur when we're really low on sleep, right? So we need that to kind of keep our resources up and kind of have that that capacity to respond effectively when there are these stressors. So, and yet, gosh, when it's as stressful as it is right now, for many of us, including myself at times, it can really be challenging to sleep. So what are the things we can do? One is to kind of think about keeping routines, particularly having a routine time that you wake up. So if you sort of start this habit of like, I'm going to stay up till 2 o'clock in the morning one night and sleep in till noon the next day, and then the next night I'm going to try to go to bed at 10 p.m. and get up at 7 a.m. That's not likely to be very successful.
That's not going to be a good plan for helping me have good sleep.
Not so much. So keeping those rhythms, having that regular wake time, all of those things is really helpful. Using the bed for sleep and not for lots of other things is also helpful. So if you, and everybody's work situation is different right now, but if you can use the bed for sleeping, not where you do your work and things like that, so that the bed is associated with, I sleep here, that's what I do here. Other things you can do are avoiding caffeine, right? As is in the afternoon, watch for lots of alcohol at night. That can also disturb your sleep. And a big one is actually tied to screens, right? So avoiding kind of looking at screens in the hour or two before you're trying to sleep can be really helpful. The light there can make it harder for you to fall asleep. So, that's the time to kind of pull back, avoid sort of reading the upsetting news and stories right before you go to bed, turn the screens off, and instead read, listen to podcasts, whatever it is for you that's going to kind of help you to unwind a little bit is really
I
helpful.
want I want to ask your advice again here,
Yeah.
like in terms of your practical suggestion. So, like, what do you think is a good idea about, let's say my bedtime is 11 o'clock. When do you think is a good time to like have that cushion when I'm not on screens and looking at news and, like an unwinding time?
Yeah, so I mean, it's got to be individual that's going to work for you. So, I'd like to say something like 9:30. So at that point, you're kind of,
Oh,
stopping looking at screens and things like that. The time's going to partly depend. I say 9:30 in part because I have children in my home, and part of when I look at screens is after they go to bed, and then I sort of catch up a little bit, right? Before I sort of move into my unwinding time. So everybody's got to figure out what's realistic for them in their life. But if you can think about, sort of an hour or two before bed, really taking a break from those screens, that can be really helpful and kind of shifting into that unwinding time.
what about watching just a fun show? Because that's on a screen. Is that
Yeah, I mean, I
part
think
of
some
my
of it is.
unwinding?
Yeah, I think you've got to figure out what's going to work for you, right? So that doesn't have that same particular light that a laptop does, for example.
I see.
So, you can try that and see how that's working for you. So for a lot of people, that's going to be effective. I think it's about trying things and then monitoring kind of what the impact is. So for example, I read before I go to bed, but I was reading a book that was great, but was really heavy. And I had to switch books because it was just kind of too intense for this time. I had to kind of switch to a book that was more of my kind of beach read kind of book.
Uh-huh.
And that made a difference for me in being able to fall asleep. So again,
Yeah.
it's about kind of I like to encourage people to collect data on themselves, right?
Okay.
So, have a hypothesis about what's going to work for you. For me, it's about what kind of things I'm going to read before bed. Again, take a break from those screens before you're trying to sleep and then see, does that work for you?
Yeah.
And then if it's not, try something different. And some of it is also what you do during the day, right? So we talked a lot about kind of the nighttime routine, but getting exercise during the day, making sure you get sunlight during the day, all of those things are actually going to also be really helpful for the likelihood that you'll have a good night of sleep at night.
So not just exercise, but getting some sunlight is going to help me.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're really responsive to kind of what are our rhythms, right? And so we are aware, our bodies are aware when it's daylight versus nighttime. And so the more we can have kind of keep those rhythms and have some regularity to that. And if we don't get any of that sunlight, our body's not kind of getting those cues of like, okay, it's daytime, we're active, we're out. And now
Right.
it's nighttime and we're kind of shutting down. So we want to try to keep those rhythms going as much as we can.
So outdoor exercise could help me with my mood, and it could also help me with my sleep.
It's going to help you with everything, quite frankly. Helps you
Okay.
with your sleep. It helps you with your depression. It helps you with your anxiety. It helps, with the anger. It's going to help you pretty much across the board. Not to mention that it's good physically for your body. So yeah,
Okay.
those are key things that we call them kind of buffering events because they help us to just kind of make it less likely that we fall into those kind of bad habits and unhealthy patterns. They kind of are a little bit protective in those ways. So really, really valuable to do. Even when you don't quite feel like it, it's a good idea to at least go for that walk outside.
Right. So before we go on to other
Yeah,
topics, I just want to maybe kind of review and see if I can remember some of these tips because sleep it can be so helpful with everything that we're coping.
right,
So having a routine, like you were saying, having a regular bedtime and also having a regular time that I get up in the morning,
right,
reducing caffeine and alcohol, especially at night, having like a period of time before bed when I get to unwind,
mm-hmm,
and if possible, minimizing the phone and the laptop screens because that light can be
Right, for the hour before you go to bed or so.
Yeah. And then definitely don't do my 40 minutes of news right before bed.
Well, at least not for most of us. I try to say figure out what's going to work for you and not have
Right,
hard and fast rules, but for most of us,
right,
that's not a great idea.
right, right. And then the last tip about uh, exercising and really making a point of seeing how much outdoor activity we can do during the day, that's going to help not only with mood, but also with our sleep. Okay,
Absolutely.
another question for you.
Yeah.
Say I'm doing these tips,
Mm-hmm.
and what if I'm still having real challenges with my sleep? What should I do?
Yeah, so there's a number of things you can do. So there are many professionals, whether that's a therapist or a doctor, who can help you with that. So it's worth having a conversation. There's actually a lot of online programs that can be really helpful as ways to manage it at this time. Cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia has a lot of research support. One example of an
So
online
let's repeat that for people if they want to Google it. So
yeah. So
if
cognitive behavior
if our
therapy for
cognitive
insomnia.
behavioral therapy for insomnia. So if I Google that, I'm probably going to get linked to some helpful resources.
Yes, absolutely. And I'll give some examples of websites that people can go to look up, particularly things tied to programs for sleep and things like that.
Okay, great. Thank
Yeah,
you.
in fact, there's a program from my university called Shut Eye that is one example of this, but there's a number that are out there. And one of the things that we haven't talked about yet, but that's important is these are all sort of behavioral strategies I've given. But another component of it is not catastrophizing if you're not sleeping, right? So part of what actually tends to make it worse is that part where we lie in bed and think, oh my gosh, now it's 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm only going to get 5 hours of sleep. Now I'm only going to get 4 hours of sleep. I'm going to be a wreck tomorrow. I won't be able to function. All of that really catastrophic thinking about not sleeping actually makes it way harder to fall asleep. So part of it is saying, okay, I'm going to feel a little tired tomorrow, but it's not the end of the world to feel a little tired. When we don't catastrophize about what it means to have a poor night of sleep, ironically, we actually sleep better. So again, things that we can do to say, okay, let's not make this worse than it is, can be really, really helpful.
Yeah, very good. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Loneliness. Okay, so challenges in this area with loneliness and maybe feeling isolated.
Yeah, there's a lot of challenges in this space for people right now, and the reason we're concerned about it is that loneliness, leads to higher stress. It's associated with worse sleep, more anxiety, more depression, and that in turn is going to make it harder for us to be motivated. It makes it harder for us to concentrate. So that loneliness has a lot of kind of negative downstream effects that are pretty significant. And so, one of the things that's important for people to recognize is sometimes people have this idea of like, well, loneliness isn't an issue for me because I am like surrounded by people all the time, right? I'm living with my partner plus 4 children. I am never alone. And it's important for people to keep in mind that you can be lonely even when you're not alone. So at this time, for a lot of people, even if they're not alone, they may be missing key connections in their life. So they may be, doing sheltering in home with their immediate family, but maybe they're not having any of the contact with their friends. And they have different conversations with their friends. Maybe they can share different problems and challenges with their friends than they are sharing with their family. And so remembering that those connections really matter and keeping those so that we don't have that loneliness, whether we're alone or with others in terms of our living situation, is really, really important. Because sometimes right now it can feel like we can't talk freely because we're surrounded by people in our living environment or whatever is your unique challenge. So thinking about the fact that you need to be aware of the concerns about loneliness, whether you're alone or not, is really important. And I think, one other piece that I'd say kind of tied to this is recognizing that this really, like everything we've been talking about, people are having different experiences in this space. So unfortunately, not every home feels safe and supportive. And so that can add to that sense of loneliness. For example, if you're in a home where there's lots of fighting. And so I encourage people to think about, controlling the parts of the environment that they can. Can they take walks, take breaks if things are not feeling good in their home? What are the pieces that they can do to try to feel as comfortable and as supported as they can? And how can they reach out virtually to get the supports that they need to kind of keep those connections and keep that interaction? Because the loneliness really weighs on people over time.
And if I only have one or two people that I really can feel connected with, that's really, could be really meaningful.
Really meaningful, yeah. So it's not about the number of people, it's about the quality of those connections. And so, again, trying to make sure that, asking yourself, what is it that I need? What is it that I'm missing right now? What's hard? And trying to figure out, are there ways you can get at least part of the way there? So, no, maybe you can't, go out to dinner with the friend you normally would go out to dinner with. But can you at least go for a walk and talk on the phone together so that you can have a little privacy and a chance to connect? Are there other ways to kind of help fill those needs? Because the needs are really reasonable ones. And some of the ways we would normally fill those needs are harder right now. So we just have to get really creative in kind of how we do those social interactions, how we keep those social connections.
Yeah. And then what comes to my mind as you're talking is just, how do I feel connected when someone's just listening and being a good listener? I feel connected.
Absolutely. And actually, I'm glad you raised that, because we tend to have this sense that we have to solve the problem for someone, right? We have to fix it. And a lot of the times, what's really helpful is just being a caring, supporting person, being there to kind of share the experience that the other person is having, and listening and being a support person. We're not going to be able to fix everything right now, right? People are having really tough stuff happening. They're losing jobs, all health concerns, all kinds of things are happening for people. And we can't always solve those things for people, but we can be there for them. Even if it's not physically there, we can show our support, always be willing to listen, try to be a person who they can connect with. And wherever they're at, whatever they need, we want to try to respond to that.
Oh, very good.
Yeah.
What's shame? Oh, this is interesting.
Shame.
Okay. Here's an idea. Thought. Let's suppose that I'm feeling really disappointed about not being able to do a party, and so I'm kind of feeling, but then I hear about other people that have it so much worse, and now I'm feeling guilty, or I'm being too self-centered, or what thoughts do you have about this?
Yeah, I think it's actually a really common experience right now. So I'm sure you're hearing some of the same things that I'm hearing, of people sort of being upset about something and then quickly say, but I shouldn't have those feelings because it's so much worse for somebody else. And, I have no right to be upset, kind of thing. And I think, I encourage people not to judge themselves, right? So it's not a competition about who has it the worst. So we can keep perspective about the things that we are fortunate about in our lives, at the same time as acknowledging that there are still things that are hard for us, because that is our reality, and those losses are real losses. And so just because they're not the worst possible losses, it doesn't mean that they don't need to be grieved, and it doesn't mean that we should feel like we can't acknowledge them and acknowledge the impact that it has on our lives. And so I like to think about it as, it's okay to grieve losses. It's natural and very healthy. The key is not to get stuck there, right? So if you're finding yourself sort of sinking deeper and deeper and deeper, that's a sign you need to do something differently. But it's okay to have periods where you're sad and kind of say, I really wanted to do that family vacation, and it really just plain sucks that we didn't get to do it this summer. Hopefully we can postpone it and do it next summer. But it's a real loss to kind of have that. And so, what I try to think about is the idea that grief and gratitude can coexist. And they're actually both very healthy, valuable emotions. We don't need to push one aside because of the other. They can actually coexist. And we can recognize that we can be sad about some things at the same time as recognizing that there's a lot we want to be grateful for. And, drawing on our social supports to help manage that is really, really helpful. And interestingly, in addition to kind of drawing on social supports so that we are asking for help and asking for people to support us when we're feeling those losses and feeling that grief, supporting others actually does a ton for our own mental health. So when we volunteer, when we help others, when we are a support to other persons, whatever is the way that you're able to contribute, remarkably, that actually does a ton for your mental health as well as helping the other person. So there's a lot that we can do to kind of express support for one another and acknowledge those losses that are very real and happening for people.
Yeah, good.
So, that raises this kind of issue of kind of how we help other people.
Okay.
Yeah.
How do we talk to young children about this?
No.
We have some tips on that.
And that's a really important space. And, I will say that I'm a clinical psychologist, not a child psychologist in particular, but there are some basic things that it can be helpful to kind of keep in mind. First is that we are modeling how we respond to challenging situations. So kids are watching us, right? And they're learning a lot from kind of what we do. And so trying to be calm in the ways that we communicate is really helpful if we want our children in turn to be calm. And so what we want to do is think about how can we explain what's happening in kind of age appropriate ways and offer reassurance and hope without lying. So I think about language like if it's true, saying, you want to remind your child that your family's healthy and you're doing everything you can to keep you and them safe and well. And also that, adults are there to help keep them healthy and to take care of them if they get sick, right? So we're not saying everything is going to be perfect here. What we're saying is that we are a team. And when challenges come up, we try to meet those challenges together. And so that's a really important message to convey because it says, yes, there may be hard parts, but if there are hard parts, we're going to tackle them together and you're not going to have to deal with challenges alone. In addition, explaining kind of safety steps that people can do for children is really, really helpful. So talking to them about what social distancing means, how to wash their hands for 20 seconds and sing the birthday song twice, wearing a mask, whatever are the things that you're going to teach them about how to stay safe. Not only is that important for the obvious, like physical protection piece of it, it's actually really important for their stress and mental health because what that does is give children a sense of control. Right? So all of us want to feel like we aren't helpless and we know what to do, how to manage a situation. Kids are no different. So we want to tell them what steps to take that'll help them have that sense of safety because then they know what to do and can kind of follow those pieces.
And to come up with some age appropriate ways of explaining what we're doing.
Exactly. And by the way, if you go to the CDC website, there's lots of links there about good language. American Psychological Association also has a number of, sort of help sheets of specific language you can use for kids of different ages. So you don't need to feel like you need to make it up. But these are sort of basic messages that you want to do. You also want to keep routines and structure. So just like I talked about kind of adults needing those routines and needing kind of those balance of activities, same thing for kids. And in fact, even more so for kids because they have just lost, with schools being closed, so much of their sense of normalcy, right? So many of their routines have been turned upside down. Their chances to play with friends, their soccer teams, their music classes, you name it, right? It's all been flipped for them. So helping to kind of set up routines, set up a schedule, set up some structure, doesn't have to be perfectly rigid. We're not talking about planning every minute of the day, but having those routines and structure really, really valuable for all of our mental health. Balancing that with breaks, right? We need to have fun together. And I wrote down celebrating small victories. And what I mean by that is race is kind of like, there's a feeling of like we're in this for the long haul, right? And so given this is an extended period of challenge, what we want to think about is not just planning sort of celebrations at the end, but also celebrations along the way. So, don't just wait for the school year to be over to celebrate getting through the school year. Every week after the assignments go in, have some ice cream. Doesn't have to be big, but something that sort of says, yay, we made it through this part. Take those small victories and recognize them, because otherwise it's too long to go without feeling like we're kind of having those chances to feel good.
Great idea.
And the other point that I wrote here is about planning alternatives for canceled events. So
Okay.
this goes, to the having fun kind of idea, right? So it was my daughter's birthday last week. She turned 11, and it was a challenge for her to kind of lose the chance to do her usual birthday party and not be able to get together with her friends in the usual way on her birthday and all those things. So, fortunately, they planned one of those amazing birthday parades that are really popular right now. But we also planned a whole sort of set of birthday things that we could still do at home. So my daughter loves piñatas. We got a piñata for the 4 of us in our household and had a great time filling it up with stuff and bashing it and then collecting all the candy and toys that fell out of it. So again, thinking about other things you can do to kind of serve as a substitute can be really, really helpful in this situation.
Okay, great tips. So now kids that are a little bit older, like 10 and up, tweens and teens, what are some thoughts you have about talking to teens and tweens?
Yeah, it's a challenging space, right? So I will say I also have a middle school child, and it is a challenging space to kind of figure out how to manage this time just as they're kind of going through this period of trying to establish their independence and autonomy and all that, and yet there's so much to navigate here. So some of it is kind of just normalizing that, of course, they feel stressed. Of course, they're upset about the situation. And to really kind of show your empathy, to kind of say, like, you understand why they're mad or why they're sad. And those feelings seem pretty natural in this space. And this goes a little bit to kind of you made a really wise comment earlier about, like, kind of sometimes we just need to listen to people. And I think there's some of that in this space too, of recognizing that sometimes our role is to provide support, but recognize we can't always fix it, right? They really want to, teenagers really want to get together with their friends, for example. We can't necessarily solve that, but we can try to think about alternative ways they can do it, but also just listen and say, yeah, I am sorry you have to go through that right now. That's really hard, kind of sucks, won't be forever, but it is hard. And so we're trying to help kind of manage the impact of the stress and making it okay for them to talk about it, to ask us questions. We're not realistically trying to get rid of all the stress or get rid of all the anxiety. That's probably not possible at this time. So what we want to do is instead kind of help them to manage it.
Listening, empathizing, acknowledging, kind of validating, they get to experience what they're experiencing.
Exactly. And at the same time, all those things that we've been talking about that help adults and younger children also help teens. Keeping the structure and guidelines, you still get to be a parent in all this. Those things help for teens as well, making sure they stay connected to their social supports, right? Helping them to have those virtual connections with friends, planning fun breaks with them. And, another piece is kind of recognizing that they're going to be the expert on what they need in some ways, not entirely, but in part. So asking what they need. Do they need emotional support for you? Is there something practical they need? Kind of listening about what it is that's going to help them in that situation. And then the last point I wrote is kind of going back to our anger slide. When you lose it with one another, have those moments where you snap or feel angry or yell or don't say things the way you meant to, which are going to happen sometimes, you say sorry and you move on, because that's just going to be part of it.
Great tips. Okay, now you're getting to adults.
Yeah.
So my spouse is having issues with anxiety and stress. Same kinds of tips?
It is, and so I won't spend a lot of time on this because a lot is the same, right? We want to offer support. We want to sort of normalize the experience of what they're going through. We want to plan positive time together, breaks where they're not focused on the things that are hard. There's nothing wrong with kind of having healthy distractions where we do something that just makes us feel good for a while. Encouraging them to do that healthy self-care, taking breaks from the news, all those same things that help us as individuals, help our children, help our teenagers, also help our partners. And so, part of what I would focus on here is, if things have, if those aren't doing enough on their own, what can you do, right? And so, I think about it as you're looking for 3 factors that suggest that these other strategies kind of aren't enough on their own. Part of it is the anxiety or depression or negative mood. Is it persistent, right? So it's not just when you're, reading the news, or just when you wake up, or just when you go to bed, but actually it feels like it's kind of most of the time, right? Most of the day, nearly every day. Is it pervasive? So it's not just when you're having a conversation about something upsetting, but you're feeling distressed in lots of situations and no longer able to relax or enjoy the things that you used to. Those are really important signs. And that goes with the kind of third piece, which is there impairment, right? Is it that you're not able to kind of fulfill your goals, do the things that you used to be able to do? So if for your partner or yourself or your child, really for anyone, if you notice those 3 things, that persistence, pervasiveness, and impairment, that's when you want to think about seeking other kinds of help. Fortunately, as you noted at the beginning of the webinar, there's lots of options out there. So ADAA is a fabulous resource where you can look up providers, many of whom are providing telehealth at this time. ABCT also has a good way to search. Lots of lists of self-help books tied, for example, to cognitive behavior therapy principles or other approaches that research says can be really helpful for managing the anxiety and managing the sadness that people are feeling. Mental health websites and apps, right? So I put the link up there for cyberguide.org. That's got, it's a good place to do searches. For example, if you want to search for an app to help with sleep problems, or an app to help with anger, or an app to help with anxiety or depression, it's got ways that you can search for what types of programs help different problems and for different age groups, and whether or not there's research to suggest those are likely to be helpful approaches. So that's a good place to go. If you want to get, for example, mindfulness apps, lots of support for that as a way to kind of help manage stress. Good place to kind of go and get that. I also put up there, we direct a website called Mind Trails. And that's really focused on helping people who kind of do a lot of catastrophic, anxious thinking. And so this program is designed to help people sort of shift those negative, catastrophic thinking patterns to help manage anxiety. So people are going to have sort of different needs for what's the hard part for them. But fortunately, there's a lot of resources that are out there. So I hope people won't stay suffering on their own.
And this last one is an important number that everybody should have.
Absolutely. So I put that up there because I just want to make sure people have that number handy and use it if they need to. There are a number of different sort of distress lines and options that are available for people. So even if it is that middle of the night time and you're struggling, don't struggle alone. Get help, because there's good help available.
Yeah. And if I could just add a comment about telehealth sessions, very often it can be so helpful just even having a couple or just a very few sessions with a mental health professional, just to get some individual challenges that we might be dealing with.
Absolutely. So it doesn't mean you're necessarily signing up for long-term care. But, I say to people, if you're not sure if you need help, don't feel like you have to make that decision on your own. Have an evaluation. Just have an initial conversation. Get input from a professional about whether help would be useful for you at this time or not. It's silly to sort of wait. And one of the things that sort of breaks my heart is that people with anxiety tend to wait a long time before seeking help. That tends to be sort of associated with being anxious. And so I really encourage people to think, if they think help could be useful for them, try it out. You don't have much to lose.
Yeah, great. Great tips.
Yeah.
Okay, so now it looks like you're winding up. So how do we keep riding this roller coaster? Because it just seems like it's going on and on.
Yeah, and of course there's no easy answer to this. Part of it is recognizing that this is a marathon, it's not a sprint. And so what that means is kind of recognizing that it's not going to work out if we get totally depleted ourselves. We need to take breaks. So for me personally, like, I am a better mom, I'm a better teacher, I'm a better researcher, pretty much a better way. I'm better at all of my different roles if I get regular exercise. It makes it just a huge difference for my emotional health. And so again, part of that recognition that this is sort of that marathon, not a sprint, is recognizing that we need to do breaks. We need to do the things that are going to kind of keep us healthy. And part of that is then making space. And what I mean by that is figuring out like what are your priorities and how can you focus on those? Because you're not going to be able to do everything perfectly now, right? Most of our kids are having more screen time now than they usually have. Most of us are not being quite as productive in our work life as we normally are. Many of us are not making gourmet meals every night if we're trying to juggle all of those other things. That's okay. So we have to kind of give ourselves some space to say, these are the things that are really important to my values and my priorities. I'm going to focus on those. And I might be simplifying in some other areas and recognizing that I'm not going to be able to do everything perfectly right now. And so, I think all of that helps us to recognize that we are only going to be successful in this if we're giving ourselves some breathing room to not do it perfectly. And some of it is also just reminding ourselves that this is temporary. Yes, it's a marathon. It's not a short temporary period, but it's not always going to be this way. And so one of the things that's important to know is, history tells us that most people really are resilient, even through terrible situations, all kinds of adversity. Most of us ultimately, even after a period of difficulty and stress, we'll figure out kind of how to get back up on our feet. We will draw on our social supports. We'll do those things. And so recognizing that it's not always going to be bleak in the way that it is now can help us to kind of manage this time. And I think,
The next tip you have about that, yes, we have uncertainty.
yeah, no, it's an important one because I think that's a big part of, this kind of brings us full circle, right? You asked early on about kind of why this time is so difficult. We talked about kind of because it's unpredictable, it's uncertain, parts feel uncontrollable. And that's hard for us, right? We want the story. We want to know what's next, how we can plan for it. And so it can help to, at least for me, to recognize that uncertainty doesn't equal catastrophe, right? So we want to change the meaning of what uncertainty means. What does it mean to kind of not know what's going to happen? So if we think not knowing, being uncertain, means terrible things are going to happen, well, no kidding, we're going to be really stressed out because of the uncertainty. But if we think uncertainty just means we don't know yet, but we believe that we can handle challenges that come our way, then being uncertain isn't so scary. So maybe I don't know, but that's okay because whatever it is, I'm going to deal with kind of what's in front of me when I know what I'm dealing with. And I believe that I have the resources to manage that situation. So we have a choice about kind of how we think about what it means to be uncertain. And this is something we actually do all the time, right? So we're uncertain about when we apply for a job. We're uncertain whether someone will say yes if we ask them out on a date. We're uncertain about 8 million things, and we tolerate that. And in fact, we're very used to it, and we have strategies to manage that. So we need to figure out what helps us to manage uncertainty in other areas of our life and do that in this situation as well. And part of that is, again, recognizing that we are able to respond to challenges. So even if we don't know exactly what they are, we will eventually, and then we're going to be able to kind of use our resources, use our supports to try to manage that situation.
I love this last tip on your slide about there are so many examples of just amazing kindness. It's very inspiring.
I am struck by it over and over again. So there are truly many sad, horrible stories right now. But the flip side of all the amazing stories about people helping one another, supporting each other, coming together in these such creative, ingenious ways, to me are really inspiring. And so as difficult a time as this is, it also is a time for some new opportunities. And we want to make sure that we see those good things at the same time as we're kind of acknowledging all of those difficult parts, because that will make it so much easier for us to be able to manage this stress right now.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you so much. This is such really, really helpful material. And I want to thank everybody for watching and encourage you, watch it again, share it, like it. If you have questions, feel free to email your questions again to webinars@adaa.org. And again, thank you so much for what you had to share with us. It's just so helpful.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you to ADA, and thank you to the listeners who are watching, and for all those who are working so hard to try to manage this difficult time. I hope everyone takes good care.
Okay, thanks again.